The Generational Wealth Network. Learn about tools, techniques, and strategies to build generational wealth.
Welcome to the next episode of the Generational Wealth Network. I am your host, Sean Chrysostom, and with me is my great friend, Frank Simpson of the Simpson firm, LLC. Today we're as always, going to be talking about generational wealth. And as we talked about and we continue to talk about, this is really the discussions Frank and I have over the phone of how do we build generational wealth within our communities. But when we talk about generational wealth, we're really talking about something much different than what most people talk about. So Frank and I are going to have a great discussion today, and we're really going to talk about how do we do it from the standpoint of focusing on the 5 steps or types of wealth. Those 5 types of wealth include financial wealth. We know about that, right? Frank, net worth, and you and I talk. That's discussed a lot. You know, people are always about what's your net worth, and that is very important. But there's also what we call social wealth, which is your reputation. I feel that especially in the age of what we call social media, a lot of people don't pay attention to their reputation, their character. What do people say about you, and what do people know about you? Time wealth, which is freedom. You know, if I go after a job, how many young people, Frank, have you heard say, I just want to make the most money? But they don't consider, well, wait a minute, is this going to eat up my time with my family? And then physical wealth, which is your health. A lot of times we take for granted our health until we get that negative report. And now the doctor's telling us something. And last but not least, and probably even most important to me, is spiritual wealth, which is our relationships. For many of us, it's our relationship with God, relationship with our Creator, that sort of thing. But it's also our relationship with family. You know, so we want to make sure that we're focused on all these different 5 types of wealth while we talk about financial wealth. So Frank, what do you have to say in terms of as we talk about these things, and you and I have talked about this, how do you feel about this concept as we go into it?
So again, wealth is a continuum, and it's not about being, to the max in one aspect of things.
Unbalanced.
Right? So it's about ensuring that you have the optimal level across all the board, all the different, aspects of wealth.
And that's the thing. I like the idea of balance because a lot of times in our society, there's an imbalance. A lot of people are so focused on the financial side, they neglect the personal side. I know I've worked in banking for many years, and there's a saying that the person who benefits from all the work of the entrepreneur is the second spouse, only because they've committed so much time to the business. Or people who commit so much time to their career, they find that their family suffers. So as we dive in today, I really want to talk about featuring today, Frank, really talking about a couple things. And particularly, I want to talk about how do you build wealth, okay? And so when we talk about wealth, can you give our audience your definition? There are many definitions. How would you define wealth from a financial standpoint? We know there are these 5 different types, but from a financial standpoint, we know it's assets minus liabilities is net worth. But would you want to add some meat to that bone and define wealth for us?
Yeah, so for me, wealth is just having the resources to live the lifestyle you want, right? So you being wealthy and me being wealthy can be 2 different things.
Absolutely.
I mean, we said previously, it's about running your race, not running someone else's race. So I don't necessarily need to be Jeff Bezos rich to consider myself wealthy, but if I
But a lot of people would like you a lot more if you were.
And no one's going to complain if they absolutely have
Absolutely.
that. But like you said, you can't really touch on the finance part of it without really thinking about the rest of it. Because imagine if you did have Jeff Bezos money, but you didn't have a lot of time.
Right.
You had 30 days to live. Or 24 hours to live, and someone's going to give you $1 billion.
Right.
Are you choosing the time at that point, or are you choosing the $1 billion? So
Absolutely.
It's really about just having enough, right, to live the lifestyle that you desire, and at that point you become wealthy. If you're thinking about generational wealth, it's the same idea, but it's about passing along that freedom, right? That freedom to do what you want, live the lifestyle you want, be with the people that you want. To me, that's wealth.
Yeah, exactly, and the relationships that you build long after individuals have passed on, they remember their grandfather that took them on fishing trips. I've talked to many people, being a pastor, their grandmother took them to church, and that's what they remember. They remember Sunday school. They remember going back to grandma's house. They remember her sitting and teaching them to pray. So when we talk about generational wealth, and we do talk about finances, we want to make sure that we don't overemphasize any one area. So what I want to talk about, and this is go ahead.
And one thing to just kind of mention, I
Sure.
saw this, circulating social media before, but it's at the end of the day, we're all going out in the same kind of box, right? So if you have
Doesn't matter if it's a more expensive box, it's still a box.
It's still a box.
Absolutely. And it's what people say about you and the legacy that you leave. And so that's what we want to talk about. So I saw this from you, Frank, and I really liked it on this next slide. And it basically is talking about here the different ways of what we call talking about smart investing principles, okay? And so I want to talk about that. So when you, as an investment advisor, you get in a client, the first thing that it sounds like you want to do is help them identify goals, because everybody has different goals. How do you help people identify their goals? How do you get them to what are the really key goals? Because a lot of people, they know what they want, but it's very general. How do you get them to identify specific goals?
So I take them through this assignment, and the assignment is I say, hey, Sean, walk with me for a second. I want you to close your eyes and think about some of the things you want to accomplish over your lifetime. And I ask them, who's with you? How does it smell? What does it look like? Is it cold outside?
Okay.
Is it warm outside? What are some of the things you think you want to be able to accomplish? What do you want to do? What are some of the things you enjoy doing?
Right.
And then we walk through it, and like I said, we establish a price tag for all those things. So if you want to be somewhere sunny, then we know you're not going to be in upstate New York in January, right? You're probably going to be somewhere, the Bahamas, Florida, Turks and Caicos, or whatever it may be. So we start attaching numbers to all of those ideas that they have inside their mind about what they want their life to look like.
So now what happens when there's a conflict? I want to travel and eat now, but I also tell you, Frank, I want to retire at 52. I want to retire at 50. And yet my lifestyle and the things I want in the short term are working against my long term. How do you deal with that when they identify goals that are cross purposes?
A couple different things. One, we mentioned in the previous episode of you can't finance the later part of your life. So there's going to come a time where we can't work. So at that particular point in time, you need some reserves there to be able to live the life that you want. So you have to balance between, like, is what you want to do today that important versus trading in your future? So if you thought about it, I mean, I'm a big time sports person. So am I going to trade the MVP of the sports league for a rookie? Maybe not, right? I got to think about that.
Right.
If I think potentially that rookie can be MVP material for a longer period of time, then maybe that's a decision I have to think about. But is what you're going to do today worth trading in where you want to be tomorrow, especially at a time where you aren't going to have the energy or even the opportunity to try to accumulate what you need?
Okay. So now once you've identified goals, you say establish a strategy. So everybody's goals are different. Is everybody's strategy different as well?
Everybody's strategy is different. Your asset allocation can differ from my asset allocation. So when you're younger, you can be super aggressive because there's never been, particularly if you talk about investing in the stock market, you can be super aggressive when you're young. There's never been a time that the market has taken away something, then they haven't given it back in 8 years. So your time horizon is much longer, which means you have a longer period of time to grow or recover from any down market. As you get to later in life, again, you're getting closer to retirement or needing those resources, you kind of want to become a little bit more conservative, again, because your time horizon is much shorter. So your plan is going to differ from, and even if you're the same age, we all didn't start at the same place. Some of us started a little bit further down the line than others. So because of that, I may just be getting started at 50.
Right.
So now I may need to be a little bit more aggressive than someone that's that had a head start and they started 20 years prior to me.
Or they had an inheritance, so they have some money, or they have some assets that are coming up. In fact, one of the things, we won't talk about it today, but is the great wealth transfer that's coming from the baby boom generation to Gen X and to millennials that's coming. Or literally, I hear it's hundreds of billions, if not trillions of dollars in houses and other assets. So now we've established a strategy. The next part is I don't know if it's the toughest, Frank, but staying the course. How do we stay the course when there's so many opportunities, like right now the market's down? How do you get them to stay on the ship, say, hey, we built the ship, we decided to go this way, let's not jump off of it just because we've hit a couple waves?
There's always something in the news that want you to, or that's, that gives you a reason to jump off the ship, right? So if you think back to, the Cuban Missile Crisis.
Oh, you're going way back. You're going back into the 60s. All right.
So something that I normally say to clients is, if something is really that bad, no one's getting in line to be at the bank, right? So if, a country wants to drop a nuke, who's going to be in line at the bank to get money? That's not the thing that you're going to be worried about, right? But when you're sitting at home and you hear all these things on the news, the fear, you want to make a decision based on the fear, and the fear is really irrational. So what I try to get them to understand is that based on the information that we have available to us today, based on the things that you want to accomplish in the future, we can look at how is these current market conditions impacting where you want to be long term. And then we say, okay, this $1,000 that you're down in your portfolio, what does that really mean, 50 years from now, 30 years from now, 20 years from now? It could mean just $5 less per month in retirement. Now,
less than Starbucks a day money.
Less than Starbucks a day money. Is that worth really blowing up your portfolio? And then most clients understand, like, okay, all right, you're right. So it's really this element of coaching as a financial professional that you have to help them understand what they don't know.
Now, one of the things that when you said that fear, there's an acronym for fear, false evidence appearing real, and that's really something. My daughter had a saying that she shared with me that I've always kept with me. She said, more people have lost their millions or their future out of fear than out of failure. Failure creates greater loss, the fear I should say, than failure, because a lot of people are on a good path and then they jump ship because fear. But I like that.
So if you think about what happened in 2008, I mean, where markets were down 30+%.
The housing market, especially housing, and then it trickled into the stock market. Yeah,
where the stock market was down 30+%. Then you fast forward to 2009, the market was up. 2010, the market is up. 2011, the market is up. 8 straight years the market was up after that downturn in 2008. Imagine if you got out, you sold, you put your money in the bank at that particular time period. Interest rates were low, so they weren't giving you much return.
Right.
We talked about this before. Inflation is a real risk to money sitting in the bank. I mean, those kind of opportunities you can't miss out on. So when you think about the generational wealth gap, other communities where they're keeping their money invested long term, and in some communities we're taking our money out too soon, I mean, that creates that gap. That creates that shortfall in retirement that none of us wants to see.
No, absolutely. And then the last part is you said adjust over time. So there's some time where you will make adjustments. What are the couple things that cause you to say, okay, we do need to adjust our plan? And you mentioned asset allocation. Explain that a little bit. You're talking about the mix of stocks, bonds, precious metals. Talk about asset allocation and when you decide, yeah, it is time for us to adjust. Not based on just short-term trends, but what are the long-term things, implications that make you say we need to adjust?
So with asset allocation, we got to think about what companies we want to invest in, and not individual companies, but what size of a company.
Okay.
Do you want to invest in, we talked about this, large cap growth companies, large cap value companies, small cap value companies, and across the board. So we always start with a mix of that. And it's based on, current market conditions and what we anticipate to happen in the market. In year X, you may want to be tilted more towards precious metals or defensive stocks, things that we always going to need, right? Milk, butter, transportation.
Your staples, right.
Gas, your staples, right? And then other years you might want to be tilted more so to growth companies because, the economy is doing well.
So tech companies in that?
You got it, right? And you want to be heavy on Microsoft, Apple, et cetera. So you always want to look to asset allocation. And then over time, you always want to rebalance because your asset allocation get out of whack and you want to make sure that your portfolio is working the way that you want it to work.
Okay, well, I like that strategy. So we identify goals, we establish a strategy, we stay the course, and we adjust over time.
And you mentioned what time would you adjust? Like what would make one adjust? The biggest thing that would make one adjust is really, again, what's happening in your life, right? So did you have any life events? Did you have a kid? Did you get married? Are there health issues?
Right.
Those kind of things make you adjust a portfolio before current market conditions make you adjust a portfolio. And I think those things have a bigger impact than current market conditions or the news cycle.
So life-changing events. And then as you're getting closer to retirement, now looking and saying, do we need to adjust? Because as you said, you need to get less risky.
Yep.
Okay, all right. And the last question I have on that before we jump into our next topic is, of those 4 things, is there one that's harder, you think, for people to identify goals or establish a strategy, staying the course? Is there one harder than the other, or do you find that people have challenges in all areas and it really depends on the individual?
I think it really depends on the individual.
Okay.
But believe it or not, when I sit down to have these conversations with people, they got an idea of when they want to retire. So they know the age, like, you know,
Right.
I would love to retire tomorrow, or I would love to retire at 50 or at 55. They often don't know what it looked like. They haven't really thought about that. And that assignment that we kind of walk through, like close your eyes and imagine like who's there, is really impactful and powerful, you know, for them. But I think the hardest part of it all is just really staying the course. When you don't know, you don't know. And I
Right.
think part of the news, right? Again, we have,
But if it bleeds, it leads.
if it bleeds, it leads, right? And they want you to, you know, to be afraid.
Exactly, drives ratings.
It drives ratings, right? And now you're calling up your advisor, or you're looking at your portfolio every day. I can give you a quick story. You know, my dad had money in the market, and really, he was really my inspiration for being where I am today. And look, if I can give you the story, he had parents. My dad was born in Washington, D.C., but he had parents that were born in Anderson, South Carolina.
Okay.
His parents was born in 1919, 1911. His great-grandmother was born in 1890, and his great-great-grandmother was born in the 1860s. So when we think about that in you know, overlaid of American history, like there's not a lot of trust with the financial systems.
Right.
And so when he retired from D.C. government, he had, you know, amassed you know, more money than he thought he would ever.
And he had a pension.
That he would ever see, right? And he went to the bank. The bank convinced him to put the money in the market, all in one mutual fund, by the way, right? And he's watching it every day, literally every day. And when the market was down in 2001, you know, at the start of the tech bubble, I mean, he was down a couple $1,000, and he just got out. He was just too afraid of, you know, kind of where things would go. So, but when you think about that, you know, probably about 2016, and he had about $100,000 in. And in 2016, I looked at it like, what if he just stayed the course?
Right.
What would that have looked like? That was a $700,000 decision.
Wow.
That he made with, again, I was a high school kid at the time, so, you know, I just knew how to check the paper and give him, all right, this is where the value of your money is today. But I think the hardest part is just really staying the course, creating a plan, sticking to it, make sure you're engaging with a competent advisor that understands what you're trying to accomplish over time, and that's going to support you in getting there.
And when you say staying the course, and you're an athlete, you played basketball, don't you find that's the same thing with athletics, that a lot of times where people jump out is when things get hard. You know, the team's losing. Everybody loves the team when they're winning. Teams losing, coaches maybe giving harder practices. It's that ability to stick with it and follow through and say, you know what, I know it's hard right now, but this is going to help me in the long run. And I think sometimes when people, like, for example, get into the market or get into anything during the bull, like we've talked about in the past, you know, when people first get their taste of riding the bear, you know, they've only accustomed to the bull market. Every time they pull up their statements, it's always going up. Love that. It's that first time they get that first statement and it's down a little bit. Okay, I'm good. Another month it's down. 6 months later, it's down even more. That's when everybody's ready to pull the ripcord and say, I'm out of this. And like you said, the danger in that is that when you step out at that point, you don't know that you might be costing yourself thousands, tens of thousands, or hundreds of thousands of dollars. And that's legacy making money.
And we talked about time horizon. I think it's important for us to just expand on that a little bit. When, again, I mentioned also working with a competent advisor. So when we're planning with clients, we also help them to understand, like, all of your money isn't on the same timeline.
Right.
So we plan in what we call buckets. So you have a 0 to 1, right? We talked about emergency fund.
Right.
You have a 1 to 3 year bucket. You have a 3 to 5 year bucket, a 5 to 8 year bucket, and a 8 to 10 year bucket, and a 10 plus year bucket, right? So we know that any money that's in that 10 to plus year bucket, we can be really aggressive with that. And even if the market is down today, it don't really matter. You don't need this money for 10 years. 10 years moving forward. And we already talked about the market has never taken away anything in the 8 year period and haven't given it back. So when you're working with someone, they help you to understand, like, this is how I'm managing my money. This is where this bucket of money kind of sits within my asset allocation. I think clients can start to really understand, like, okay, all right, I can calm down now. Like, we have a plan and we're managing it, and someone's looking after my best interest. It's no different than, going to your physician and making sure that you're taking all your battery of tests to see that you're in optimal health.
So when you look at those different buckets, and I'd like to go a little bit deeper with that. So even someone who is, let's say they're in their 50s or 60s, like myself, and you have all the buckets filled, are you saying there's like a bucket even that if I take care of the things that my wife and I might need, a bucket where we're still extremely aggressive, because that bucket I'm looking at for children and grandchildren. So I'm investing as if I were 20, not for myself. That's in some other buckets that are more conservative. But that last bucket, I'm like, this is generational money. So I'm willing to base it not on my time horizon, but my son's horizon that's 22, or any grandchildren. So I'm willing to be a lot more aggressive, because in the other, let's say 4 or 5 buckets, I've taken care of what I think my wife and I might need and what we would need for our lifetime. But I have one bucket here that I won't say speculating, but I'm willing to put a lot more risk in, because that time horizon is not based on my lifetime, it's based on theirs.
Yeah, absolutely. And again, you give the client also the comfort that what I need today, that's 0 to 1, 1 to 3, in the next few years is going to be there, right? Because we invest in that somewhat conservatively. And you're absolutely right. You got to plan for the future too, right? Like if you're in a situation where you've done well and you saved enough and you know that there's no way in this lifetime, based on the lifestyle I want to live, I'm going to spend all this money, you can certainly be more aggressive with that generational bucket.
Absolutely, and so that helps us out. So the last thing I want to do in the time that we have left, I want to go to what I call the wealth pyramid over here, and it's just something that I've created when we take a look at finances and the structure. Now, with anything you construct, we always understand that the foundation is key, right? You got to have a strong foundation for a building or anything. So I teach a lot, Frank, about credit and money management as being the base of what you do, because I found that if my credit's poor, it's hard for me to accumulate those other assets and so forth. And so one of the things I'd like to get to, and when we do another session, I'd like to just touch on it now, is the four areas that help build wealth, and getting into, not fully, we'll dive into it some more deeper in another conversation, but the tax consequences. You know, there's a saying that says what? The only 2 short things in life are death and taxes, okay? Uncle Sam's gonna get his one way or the other. But when you start thinking about, and what I love talking to you about, Frank, first of all, you're a very straightforward, honest, no beating around the bush type person. But you're in 2. You're both an entrepreneur and you're in the investment area. And so when we start talking about taxes, one of the things that I've observed is that in a capitalist economy, income earned from assets generally has tax advantages over income earned from working, okay? Whether that's capital gains taxes on investments, whether that's owning your own house and what happens when you sell it and you get that back, even as you and I have talked about, running your own business and employing your children. So just in general, in the time that we have, we can't go too deep onto it. We'll go deeper in another conversation. Talk about tax planning strategies when you're working with people on their investments. How do you approach taxes? Because everybody's in different tax brackets. We know about tax deferred stuff, but how do you approach taxes, just in a broad 50,000-foot view? Yeah,
so you're absolutely right. We probably need another 30 minutes.
Absolutely. We'll see if we can get that.
But the same way you approach it with the money, right? So you got to have, again, a tax strategy,
right?
And you got to separate that into buckets as well. So you got to think about long term. Where do you want to put? Do you want to have a bucket where you're pulling money away tax free, and then you want to have a bucket where you're pulling, and normally that tax free is money that either already has been taxed or there's tax favorable rules in place from the IRS that allow you to not have it taxed after a certain point in time.
Would that be like municipal bonds or things like that?
That'd be like municipal bonds. That'd be like, again, we all know about, Roth IRAs.
Roth IRAs, that's what I was going to say next.
Something that most people don't know much about, like, index universal life insurance policies. You just kind of want to have that tax advantage bucket. And then you want to have that bucket that you may get taxed at later on down the line, right? So you're talking about your 401k and all the other pre-retirement savings.
So, and I've noticed that a lot of jobs now have Roth 401ks. So that's something where maybe you want to diversify. You don't want it all in the tax deferred stuff. You want some of it to go into a Roth 401k, because then when it allows you to pull stuff out. Now talk to me again, and I want to, go ahead.
So you bring up a great point, because particularly for young earners, and we always preach to them, again, like, toss a lot of money away into your 401k, toss a lot of money away into your 401k. I say that's not always true, right? Toss the match into the 401k.
Right.
The match is guaranteed because now you get 100% return on your investment. You're not, like, where are you going to get that at? But everything beyond the match, particularly for a young person, is a conversation, because normally when you're 20, you're making the least amount of money you're going to make in your lifetime.
You're not in your peak earning years.
So you're also not in your peak tax bracket.
Right.
So it may be more advantageous to pay the taxes on everything outside of the match, and then put that into a place that's going to be a little bit more favorable tax long term.
I've never heard anyone talk about that based on the age, looking at your tax bracket at that point. In the couple minutes we have left, and I always like to build off of your sports experience. So as an investment advisor, oftentimes you're working with an individual, but you've got to work with a team of people. So how do you work with, say, when we're talking about taxes, the accountant or CPA for somebody? How do you work with that person, especially if they may have a different idea than you do for that individual? You're the investment advisor, the CPA or accountant is trying to get them to pay least taxes. How do you work with a team of individuals, an attorney, a tax professional that's working with your client?
So the one thing that we try to do differently at our firm is we try to give every person the family office experience.
Okay.
And in the family office, you want to have your investment advisor, your insurance professional, your tax professional, not necessarily a CPA, by the way, and we'll talk about that, and your lawyer all working in unison for the better benefit of the client. When it comes to selecting a tax professional, I think it's important to talk about. We always think a CPA, but in fact, the IRS only designate one professional as the tax professional in the U.S., and that person is an enrolled agent, or often goes by the title of an EA. Normally, a CPA is more audit related. That's why we call them certified public accountants, because they're supposed to go in and look at companies' books and certify those as to be true. So I think it's important to really, chat with a professional like yourself, myself, to kind of point you in the right direction for how to build out that team and make sure you have, again, all the right pieces on the team, not just one or the other, not just a financial advisor, but a financial advisor who also has some kind of tax expertise or have someone on their team that has tax expertise. Also looking at insurances. Again, one of the biggest things, particularly in the state of Maryland, a lot of people don't think about, there's an inheritance tax. So how are we going to plan for that, right? A lot of savings that you're going to have as it relates to taxes is going to come maybe when you're not around or later on in life. Okay. So you got to make sure you have a 4-person team minimum, or someone embodying all of those expertise so that they can help you, realize the complete financial plan that you need.
No, but it sounds like you're very good at making sure the team is working together. Unfortunately, some people have, Uncle Felix on the team, and you got to say, you don't want advice from an uncle or a relative. Not that it can't be good advice, but you want to make sure that they understand what they're doing, because I'm sure you've run into situations where people are taking financial advice from people, and sometimes I say, look at their financial situation.
And just because you made a lot of money don't mean that you're good with money.
Absolutely. You could have had and we will get this another time. I've seen people who've had that one luck wonder, and then what do? They create a book, or they write something about making money, and they know they can't do it ever again. They just struck lightning in a bottle. So that's all we have time for today, Frank. As always, the conversation goes too quickly, but I really appreciate your time. I think you've shared a good bit of knowledge. I know I learn something every time I talk with you, and I come away more knowledgeable, so I know our audience has. So again, this is the Generational Wealth Network. We hope that you've enjoyed this conversation that I've had with my friend Frank Simpson of the Frank Simpson LLC investment firm. We thank you for your time, and we're out of here. Join us next time when we talk more about generational wealth. Thank you and good evening.